Hi guys, Ted Elsner, Sacramento Historical Fencing Academy. So, again, stuck on a nice sunny day, finally not raining on me, during the apocalypse, waiting for it to end. Random thoughts, random musings, if you will. So, I want to talk about time, right? We got a lot of it on our hands. It's a discussion that goes around, comes around. A big topic that comes up a lot in historical fencing is, time and tempo, and does it exist, right? Like, does tempo exist in the German system? This debate goes back and forth a lot. Recently, there was in particular a discussion about Indes and what Indes means. And so I think for me, an important understanding is that when we're talking about anything, right? If we're talking about any kind of subject, about things, it's important to understand that what we're talking about doesn't exist. So what do I mean by it doesn't exist? Well, let's take this, right? What would you call that? Would you call it a stick? Would you call it a piece of wood? Would you call it a branch, a really small one, a twig, right? What is that? Whatever words we choose to define for this thing, my daughter wants it back, are words that we as humans have come up with to define the thing. So it exists. It's a piece of a tree. Again, tree or bush. What is it? These look like trees behind me, but if they were shorter, hadn't let them grow so big, there might be bushes. The words that we choose are our choices, right? So when we get back to the question of vor, nach, indes, tempo, these are words that have been chosen by particular people in a particular language to describe something that exists. That concept is time, right? We flow through it, we move from one point to another within it, and so we have to understand that if tempo is something in Italian fencing, it exists because that term tempo is used to define something observed and observable. So that observable thing exists in German fencing as well. Now, does that mean that the Germans have the exact kind of one-to-one translation of tempo to something in German? Well, no, because the languages arose from ultimately different origin points. Yeah, you go back far enough, they're both Proto-Indo-European, but they have a lot of evolutionary differences. So within the German system, we see things, I often describe it as a much more self-referential point of view as opposed to more of a objective outside point of view. Things happen before me or after me, right? So vor and nach. I can see a motion start before I move, or a motion can start after I move. Okay, cool. Not something the Italians talk about. Instead, the Italians talk about one of the things of tempo is defining a motion and saying that is a tempo. Right, so we could look at this twig and say that this twig represents an amount of time, and it does represent an amount of time, right? It's a tempo. It takes me a certain quantity of time to move my finger from one end to the other, okay? Whereas in the German system, this end, if I start to move, right, it's arguably I'm moving, if this is the thing in time, and I'm moving, I'm before, and when I get to the other end, I'm in the nach, right? It's before me or it's after me. Yeah, right, so one end, the object is before me, I'm in the vor, in this case, because I'm moving before it. Language gets screwy. Then on the other end of it, I'm in the nach, right? Or it's kind of referential between it. A better way to look at that is, here's the stick out there in front, I'm moving towards it, I'm in the vor. Here's the stick moving towards me, I'm in the nach. We could look at kind of the concept of light in the same way, of red shifted versus blue shifted. My daughter, come here, right now, if I'm not moving and she's handing the ball to me, right, she was in the vor. I took it from her in the nach because it was coming that same kind of thing. But that handing off took place in one tempo. So that leads us to another element in German language, and that's the question of Indes, right? Which the period Germans make a lot of language written about. They talk about how important it is. And arguably, Indes is performing something in tempo, right? It's performing something in both the time and space available for the action, right? So if this stick represents the time and the space that it takes for my cut to go through, right? Because it has to go through a certain amount of time to travel from one end to the other, but it also occupies a point in space. Indes has to happen both inside the time and inside the given space parameters of that thing. So it's in tempo. Now, I would argue that all actions that are Indes are in tempo, but not all actions that are in tempo are Indes. Some of them are Nachreisen. Okay, thank you. Nachreisen, I think, is the key that we have to look at to really unlock this question of time in German. Too often we look at it as a verb, right? Or, excuse me, too often we look at it as an action. But realistically, it is putting time into action, right? It's choosing those moments in tempo, as the Italians would say, to attack it. If I have my hand out in one position and I take it away, while I'm moving away in tempo, an opening presents itself into which I should attack with Nachreisen, the following or chasing after, whatever your preferred English translation is. Personally, I'll just keep it as Nachreisen. So that is an action in tempo. Is it Indes? Kind of, but doesn't necessarily have a Fühlen component to it, because I'm not looking for a stimulus that I will or will not feel, but rather seeing you go away, I attack into that opening. So that's why I say that it's very similar. They occupy the same conceptual framework as tempo, but they are slightly different, right? Whereas if I'm striking in towards something and I see that the person has changed through beneath, then Indes, I immediately want to turn my long edge back in. The stimulus in that case of the motion being that I did not feel the expected parry, and so forth need to adjust. So when you talk about time, consider taking Nachreisen and treating it as the verb form, whereas vor, nach, and Indes really are much more nouns. They are used to describe things that exist: branch, stick, twig, before, after, inside, in between, immediately, instinctively, whatever Indes you want to use, Indes. But they describe those things. Whereas Nachreisen is that verb form. It tells us one of the ways in which we can use them. Now, yeah, I know Indes can also be conjugated as a verb, yay, German, so things get messy. But the next time the debate comes up, is tempo something in German fencing? Yeah, it's two terms. It's Indes and Nachreisen. Having said that, be very, very careful about mixing the two and translating one for one back and forth. Tempo and Indes, tempo and Nachreisen are complementary terms. They're describing parts of the same thing, but they are not the same thing. So just a little thought for today, guys. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe, leave us a comment, and thanks. We'll see you on Sunday for our live stream.